Good evening, everyone. It is Monday, January 22nd, 2024. And Happy New Year to everybody. Believe it or not, this is the beginning of our fourth year doing CPA Presents. We started this in 2020. So thank you for signing on tonight. Really appreciate it. My name is Mike Kasalniak. I am the CPA Flight Safety Chair for the Colorado Pilots Association. And tonight's topic is general aviation weather issues. Our speaker is Mr. James Paul Dice, otherwise known as JP. JP is a meteorologist, corporate pilot, and flight instructor. Tonight we will discuss general aviation weather issues pilots may encounter, how to evaluate and plan for them for a safe and successful outcome. JP's passion for aviation began at an early age, growing up next to a small strip in Central Florida. He has been flying airplanes since 2011. JP worked in broadcast meteorology and most recently serving as chief meteorologist for a Birmingham, Alabama-based television station. With his aviation and meteorology experience, he frequently speaks to pilots about aviation weather safety and is a regular contributor to AOPA Pilot magazine. In fact, the latest issue, the January 2024 issue, page 90, has an article that JP wrote about avoid known icing conditions. He is also a weather expert and instructor for internet-based PilotWorkshops based out of Nashua, New Hampshire, as well as an FAA FAASTeam representative. JP holds a BS from the University of Florida and an MS from Mississippi State University. JP has a wide variety of experience in both single and multi-engine aircraft. He is an active flight instructor and holds an ATP. He is type rated in the Citation 525 and the Gulfstream IV. He owns a Mooney 201 as his personal aircraft. As a reminder, if you would like wings credit for this online seminar, please send me your full name and email in the comments section, or you can send it to flightsafety@coloradopilots.org. Let us begin. I now turn this over to JP. Thank you, JP.
All right, thanks, Mike, and good to be here tonight. Hey, you talked about the Mooney 201. Here it is. I've got it with me. That's it, right here, and it's all of its glory. Direct from, I think this was factory direct models, but that is it. Love that airplane. It has been very, very good to us. Pretty fast and efficient. Love talking about airplanes, and I probably have not been flying nearly as long as some of you guys. It was a second career for me. Did television weather for a long time and always wanted to fly. So back in 2010, started taking flying lessons. And I tell everybody, it got out of hand. I got my private instrument and just kept adding more ratings. Before you knew it, I had an ATP and instructor ratings. And I was leaving the job in TV to go fly G4s back and forth to South America for a couple of years. And now I fly for the Pepsi bottler here in the Southeast. So that's what I do these days. Lots of fun, but one of my big passions, of course, is meteorology. And if you look at these NTSB reports, and they just drive me crazy. If you look at them, you see these airplane crashes. Far too many people are being killed in bad weather. And I don't think that pilots go out there and say, hey, I'm going to go fly a plane and kill myself today. I don't think they go in that spirit. I think there is a lot of, I don't know what I don't know. And I came to this realization at one point when I was going through my pilot training, and I was saying, okay, here's what pilots are learning about weather. And it was very much a cursory type level of knowledge. It was very baseline, and a lot of it was really outdated. Looking at old DIFAX charts from the 70s and 80s, and I looked at some of this. I'm like, we haven't messed with this since my early days in TV weather when I was first starting out. There's so much better stuff out there these days. So we're going to get started. I'm going to show you some graphics and talk about them and all of that. And we'll have time for questions if there's anything that doesn't make sense or you want to ask me about anything in particular. I don't pretend to have the answers for everything, but I will at least try to lead you in the right direction. So we're going to go ahead and get rolling here. All right, and you see the little logo that Skybound Partners. That's something else that I'm into. My chief pilot and I also formed a company, and we're into aircraft management and aircraft brokerage. So that is a fun business that is actually, no pun intended, taken off quite well. All right, 80% of weather-related aviation accidents are deadly. So that means if you have an accident related to weather, chances are it is going to kill you and your passengers. The good news out of all of this, practically all aviation weather-related accidents can be prevented. You can't prevent everything, but we can certainly mitigate that risk. So why so many weather-related accidents? What's going on out there? We have more data now than you could ever imagine. We have incredible forecast models. We have state-of-the-art radar. We have radar information that's available to us inside the airplane, of course, on our mobile devices. This is what I think. Why so many weather-related accidents? Of course, we always heard get there-itis, the pressure to get to your vacation on time or to get to whatever meeting that you're trying to get to. And yeah, we have a schedule, even in the corporate world. We have needs where we have to be at certain places at certain times. But the one thing, the culture in our business is we are not going to jeopardize safety to meet that goal. We'll try to accommodate it in various ways, but we never jeopardize safety. The other thing is, I've done it before and survived. I flew into that thunderstorm before or that big cloud. Nothing happened. I'll go in there again and do it. Not realizing the limitations of the weather data. A lot of limitations to weather data. The weather data is great, but there are a lot of limitations to it. We'll talk about some of those. I always tell people, hey, if you're going to do something, always have a backup plan, maybe a couple of backup plans. If plan A doesn't work, I can do this. If this doesn't work, I can do this. You always have a method to escape, not where you're backed in a corner and it's either I get through it or we die. You don't want to have that kind of situation. And again, I think there is a level of people just don't know what they don't know about what goes in weather. Weather is one of those things that it touches everybody. I knew this from working in television weather. You'd be in the grocery store line, you'd hear people talk about the forecast or whatever, and they'd start seemingly acting like they knew what they were talking about, and you knew it's like, they don't really know what they're talking about. None of that's even makes sense. That's not how that works. So I think there is a level of that is part of this. And what we hope to do through education, through these kind of meetings, is to change some of that. We're going to touch on a number of things. Flying during the convective season, Colorado, some of the biggest hail you could ever have, front range of the Rockies. We've got icing we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about visibility. That's what we're going to touch on tonight. Peak months, March through September, most convective weather around the afternoon and evening. High winds, hail, wind shear, and extreme updrafts and downdrafts, all part of convective weather. And convection is simply the up and down movement of the air in the thunderstorm, or you have convection currents even when you're boiling water. The atmosphere is this big fluid. We are going to talk about methods to avoid some of this weather. I was a VFR only pilot for the first 3 years of my flying. And people are shocked when I tell them very seldom, maybe twice in those 3 years, did I have to cancel a trip because of weather. Many times I had to adjust, but cancel, no, I didn't have to do that. Just about if you have the right data and you have a good plan, you can generally make things work, but you have to maybe give it a little time or be very strategic about what you're doing. How do I manage my risk? Weather aware, situational awareness, a weather briefing. You can get those now with your electronic flight bags on ForeFlight or Garmin Pilot, whatever you like to use. FISB or SiriusXM weather, METARS, TAFs, model data, weather apps, turning on the television news to kind of get the big picture of what's going on. Those are all ways to be weather aware. You want to have situational awareness. And when you're going on a trip, the weather at your location and at the destination isn't all that matters. There's all that in between that you need to make sure that's okay as well. What capability is your aircraft? I have personal minimums for everything that I fly. In the jet, my personal minimums are far different than in a single engine Mooney. The aircraft, does it have the ability to climb above severe weather? Does it have an onboard radar? Or is it only data link weather? Pilot, proficiency with the aircraft. Are you one of these people? I'm in the aircraft so much, I know everything about this plane that I fly. Experience navigating convective weather, meteorological knowledge, and radar interpretation. What's your level of weather knowledge and how good are you at actually reading radar data? I have folks that will look at weather radar data and immediately see red and say, hey, that's a severe storm. Maybe, not necessarily. What a radar is doing is just measuring the energy reflected back to the radar dish. It may very well be a big hail producer, or it could be big fat raindrops and heavy rain. So it doesn't necessarily always mean that there's severe weather. Generally, we're taught as pilots, don't go into the red. That's not a bad plan. If you stay out of the red or the yellows and the oranges, that typically works out pretty well for you. But just keep in mind, the radar is not really telling you if it's severe. It may not necessarily mean it is severe. The escape plan. What is my plan if things don't go as planned? Like, for example, today I was going to fly with some students, and yesterday looking at the TAP, today was going to be fantastic. We're going to have nice ceilings and we could do our commercial maneuvers and all of that. And you got out there in reality today, and the ceilings were about 1,800 feet. Not really what we need to have for lazy eights and chandelles. So we didn't do the training today. So TAFs, weather can change. The forecast is not a guarantee. It is not an exact cast. It is just that it's a prediction. It's a forecast. So understand what that is. Some of the most common questions I get. What is MOS data? A few years ago on ForeFlight, magically you had this extra tab that appeared and it said MOS. And you click on it and it gives all kinds of cool stuff. Kind of looks like a tab. Model data is what it is. It's model output statistics. It is raw model data, and it shouldn't really be used for a go or no-go decision. There's no human hands touching MOS. That is simply just coming out of a computer model and going to your iPad. It can give you an extended preview of the weather, but it's not a forecast. Kind of gives you a rough idea if you're trying to look past the TAF periods. The TAF, on the other hand, the Terminal Aerodrome Forecast, that is actually created by meteorologists, people at the National Weather Service. So they're looking at all sorts of model data and satellite data and radar data and putting their experience and education in the mix too. And that's how they come up with the TAF. So I'm not saying you don't look at MOS. Just remember the TAF takes priority. The MOS can supplement that, but it could be a little bit sketchy. One of the great tools that I think people need to be reading, it's not part of a weather briefing, but it is from the National Weather Service. And in TV weather, we always would read these, a forecast discussion. And this is where the weather folks of the Weather Service, the meteorologists, write out what they're thinking about a storm system or the next weather maker or the long range forecast. And you can really get in their heads on what they're looking at big picture. Because sometimes they'll say in there, hey, it looks like storms in the forecast tomorrow, but this system may move a little slower than what models are suggesting, so it may come in later. So you get a more comprehensive idea on what's going to happen with the forecast. And usually they have a segment there for the long range, which will take you out to, maybe a weekend or something. So very handy information there. If you're not using this, do it. Go ahead and look at that. It is very, very important part of aiding your situational awareness. All right, data link weather. My airplane's got a radar. Well, probably not. It's got a display of radar data. It doesn't actually have a radar. Yeah, there's some jets like this one. Some Barons have radars, and newer Piper Senecas. There's some Pistons out there that have them. I ferried back a Diamond DA-62 the other day, had a great Garmin radar in the nose to augment the Sirius XM that it was receiving inside the cockpit. Data link weather itself includes FISB and SiriusXM data. FISB is the government source. It comes with, if you have ADSB in your airplane, SiriusXM value added, have to pay for that. The big limitations of both of them, time. They're delayed through the processing of the data and also the transmission of the data. So you may be looking at weather data that's upwards of 10 to 12 minutes in the past. Sometimes it could be upwards of 20 minutes, depending on what's going on. But most of the time, it may lag about 10 minutes, and it could show radar age or data age in there. It could be even older than that because you've got the time of the next rad volume scan all the way to the top, and then the processing of the data, and then the transmission. That's just how old the data is when it was received 5 minutes ago or whatever. The data itself could be older. And the reason they have not really improved upon this at this point, it's a bandwidth issue. There's all sorts of high-res radar data out there. You just can't put it all through that pipe yet. On the ground, what I would recommend, there is a radar app that is called Radar Scope. Just as it sounds, Radar Scope. It's available for the iPhones, the iPads, the Androids, even Mac computers. And it is a fantastic radar source. It will give you all radar products from the next rad, and the resolution is quarter kilometer. It's high res level 2 data. So highly suggest you get that when you're looking at weather around the area before you take off. It's really, really handy. So if you didn't know this, this is how a NEXRAD volume scan works. So the radar, even though the folks on TV will show you that sweep line going around and around in a circle, that's actually an artificial sweep line they show on TV. It looks cool. People like to see it because it's kind of like an old school radar. That's not actually the speed of what's going on with the radar. The radar has a 25-foot diameter dish. It's not spinning at 50 RPMs. It's not doing that. And it starts at the lowest elevation and then goes up and up and up, tilt by tilt, to give you this volumetric view of the thunderstorm. And the Weather Service folks get all sort of neat products from this. They're able to look at the echo tops, how tall the storm is. They can look at the vertically integrated liquid. They can look at precipitation rates, also the velocity data to determine wind speeds. A lot of information they get out of these WSR 88Ds or NEXRAD radars. One of the real limitations of any kind of ground-based radar like a NEXRAD is simply the curvature of the Earth. The farther you get away from the radar, the farther up in the atmosphere you're looking. So you could theoretically overshoot over some thunderstorms that are a farther distance. So always when you're looking at a radar on the ground, choose the radar that is closest to the weather that you're trying to look at. And that will eliminate that curvature issue. Remember, you're getting a really more of a composite type view, like a mashup of all of these radars when you're looking at it inside the airplane in relation to the data link weather. And that is data link weather right there, the inside view and the outside view. It is more of a what I call a strategic planner instead of a tactical planner. The tactical planner, you know what's great for tactical planning? Your eyes. Your eyes are a wonderful weather tool to determine what's happening in real time. Also, another great tool, remember some planes still have them, the old storm scopes that are detecting lightning. If you can find one of those that's still working, or maybe you have an airplane that still has one that's one of the newer ones, that's showing you what's happening in real time. The XM stuff, the FISB's old, the storm scopes and your eyes, that's real time. If you have a nose cone mounted radar or a pod under the wing, that is real-time data. So if you can use real-time data in conjunction with the Sirius XM data, you can have a really wonderful situational awareness picture of what's happening with the weather, and it should keep you pretty safe in conjunction with utilizing another resource, your friends at Air Traffic Control. They can also give you not only some additional radar information, the approach controllers off their ASR radars have real-time radar around the airports. And some of the airports even have terminal Doppler weather radar, like Denver would have a TDWR, which is very handy in giving you real-time information. So if you're talking to an approach controller, say at Denver, they are going to be able to give you some fantastic weather information right there, even if you don't have a live radar in your airplane. So severe storms, that's what a severe storm looks like. It's big, it's tall, it's mean. Those things can be over 60,000 feet tall. A number of things can cause them. You can have big frontal systems coming in. You can have extreme instability and rising air masses that you have during the summertime with little frontal forcing. Or you can have something that you guys would know about, or a graphics. And that's really the mechanical forcing of the air. The air hits the mountain, it's forced up, and then you get the big thunderstorm that develops. So you have a lee side, the windward side of the mountains. Of course, the lee side is going to be drier, windward is not. So that's what a thunderstorm is. And notice you do have the updrafts and the downdrafts inside of those thunderstorms. Those things can be moving at a rate of 6,000 to 8,000 feet per minute. That means if you get inside one of those, you could be going for a very wild ride to the point of breaking your airplane. Thunderstorm there taken around, this is Shelby County, Alabama. This is one of the airports that I operate out of with some of my students. And I always ask folks in the audience, good day to fly? Probably not, right? You let this pass and then you go. You don't try to get in the air as that's moving through. A few years back when I was working in Huntsville in North Alabama in television weather, there was a Cessna 210 that took off with a thunderstorm closing in on the airport like this and did a left turn going to Atlanta, ended up inside a thunderstorm, and the plane was destroyed and everybody on board the airplane died. Totally unnecessary. Have that situational awareness picture. Convective outlooks are also, go to the SPC website, Storm Prediction Center, and they will highlight the areas out to several days, out to really 3 days of what kind of risk you're going to have. A marginal risk of severe weather, a slight risk, enhanced, a moderate, or a high risk of severe weather. And this is really aimed at folks on the ground, but if you know there's going to be a moderate risk of severe weather or an enhanced risk of severe weather across your area, probably, or where you're going, that's probably not going to be a good day to fly. And sometimes even the marginal risk days can be not compatible with airplanes like a lot of us fly, the general aviation planes that are not going to be able to go over the tops of these storms. Again, Storm Prediction Center. If you just Google SPC, you'll get those outlooks. Those outlooks are also available in ForeFlight if you go under the Imagery tab. So characteristics of severe storms, winds over 50 knots. So technically, to have a severe thunderstorm, that means a severe thunderstorm warning, 58-mile-per-hour winds, hail greater than or equal than 1 inch in diameter. With severe storms, tornadoes are possible, updrafts and downdrafts over 6,000 feet per minute, and they must be avoided. This is not negotiable, so you cannot fly through these. You can't even fly really around these. Within 20 miles, according to the FAA, there are times when we can't quite make that work, but what we need to do is stay as far as we can away from these storms because you can encounter some pretty violent winds. I was talking to a fellow pilot the other day, and he was flying. This is back before you had the XM weather data, and he had the nose cone radar in the airplane and got into a storm system that was moving very quickly across the state of Indiana. And he was in a beach jet. So he was up there at 450 and he was trying to top all of this stuff. And he thinks everything's fine. And he gets into the top of a thunderstorm and it is so cold in there, he ends up icing up both of the engines of the airplane. So they lose 2 engines. Ultimately, they lose electrical. They're on standby instruments and they make a dead stick landing into an airport in Indiana. Very lucky those folks did not die in that situation. And that was also due to some of the limitations of the data at that time. This was a number of years back. Microburst, we've all heard about these. Classic microburst case was Of course, Delta 191, 1985, that was in Dallas, Texas, L1011 coming into DFW and crashes just short of the runway. And microbursts, very, very dangerous in terms of you have a headwind that turns into a tailwind. You lose lift and you are at a low power state and close to the ground. So microbursts are very dangerous. Fortunately, in the wake of several of those accidents, like the Dallas crash, there's one in Charlotte, there are a number of others, that wind shear detection has been installed at airports. And you also, in larger aircraft like airliners and corporate jets, have wind shear detection on their radar. So you'll hear something. We practice that, of course, in the simulators. You'll hear wind shear, wind shear, wind shear, and then you do the wind shear escape maneuver that they teach us in the jets. Basically, pull the go max power, and we pull the yoke back in our lap and just hang it right there on the stick shaker, trying to climb out of that. That's Birmingham, Alabama, right there. That is the city where I am coming from tonight. And that is a gust front that's actually moving across the city. And that was one of our severe weather days. I worked at a television station and we were on a mountain out the back. You guys really wouldn't call it a mountain. In Denver, this would be a little hill. It was, I think it's like 2,000 feet MSL or 1,800 feet MSL. It's a hill. But that's where the station was. We had a good view of the storms that would move across the area to the north. Microbursts, of course, you get those out west as well. You have wet microbursts that are easily detected on radar. Dry microbursts, a lot of times what you're looking at with those, case in point, you're out in the desert Southwest, you may just see the dirt being kicked up by the winds. But a microburst can be very, very dangerous. That's one of the causes of wind shear. A lot of times wind shear or microburst used interchangeably in aviation, but a microburst can result in winds over 100 miles per hour at the surface. Microburst forecasting, this is what weather folks use, a SKU-T. If I had you in the audience out here, I'd say show of hands, how many look at a SKU-T? These things have become more in vogue for the regular consumer over the last several years because there's more and more data providers out there where you can get on the internet and click on this. What you're actually looking at is you have two types of SKU-Ts. You have the SKU-Ts from the weather balloon soundings. You also have the SKU-Ts that come from the models. Those are virtual SKU-Ts. They're basically give you what the model thinks the atmosphere is going to be. But that mid-level dry air is what we look for with where the dew point and the air temperature are pretty far apart. That's what we look for with the microburst because that aids in the acceleration of that air velocity downward, resulting in the microburst. Not important that you remember all of this, just kind of know the story. This is how the folks at the Weather Service and some of your aviation meteorologists in Kansas City look at data to come up with the potential for any kind of wind shear or microburst. And that is the microburst on radar, what it looks like on an X-rad. The big donut in the center, that is the radar itself. That's really the cone of silence, as we like to call it. The green is the wind blowing toward the radar. The red is the wind blowing away from the radar. So that's a microburst signature if you were looking at velocity data. Can't get the velocity data in the airplane, but you can get it on the ground for planning purposes. We also have something, back in the day, everybody called these squall lines. They're really called QLCSs, quasi-linear convective systems. Just if you think of squall line, a line of storms ahead of a cold front, that's kind of what we're talking about here. They're found along and ahead of cold fronts. You have intense precipitation, severe winds, and lightning. Some cases you have tornadoes, but more than anything, they're hail and lightning and wind producers. Wind shear can be associated with the QLCS, intense updrafts, almost impossible to fly around. When you have one of these in your way, unless you can get over 40,000 feet, and sometimes that won't do it, you really can't get around it because it's a big, long band of storms. So the best avoidance is landing and let this thing pass by and then continue on. They can be a real bear in terms of piston airplane navigation. That's what one looks like. So if you're looking at, say you're in Birmingham and you're trying to get to Oklahoma, that's not going to work. You're just not going to be able to make that work. That's going to have to pass by. You're going to have to wait that one out. Because you may find some little holes in there, but you're still going to be flirting with disaster in many cases with something like that, and you're trying to cruise along at 8 to 10,000 feet. Situational awareness is key. Do you check the weather days in advance? If I have a trip coming up, for example, I'm doing a little vacation next week, I'm already looking at the weather for next week. I'm looking at the big picture and looking at some of the American models and European models and determining, I can't really determine if there's going to be rain and an exact point, but I can see where the high and low pressure systems are going to set up across the country and kind of get a generalized idea. Also, what the temperatures are going to be. Multiple sources of weather data. Make sure you look at big picture all the way down to really even the micro scale. Continue to check the weather. You can't say, hey, I looked at the weather 2 days ago, it's fine. Weather is very perishable. Right up to you getting in the plane and being in the plane do you check the weather. I will constantly be looking at weather information even en route to make sure nothing's changed. Is weather behaving as forecast? It does a lot of times, but sometimes there are some changes that you need to know. And are you listening to other pilots and air traffic control reports? They can give you fantastic information on icing, winds, where they're getting through successfully. You can just kind of paint the big picture, what airports are working, where there could be some problems, just by listening to what other people are saying on frequency. We're going to move on from thunderstorms now into icing. And you know, I think icing in a small plane probably scares me much more than thunderstorms. Thunderstorms, I can kind of see it. I can work around it. Icing sometimes can sneak up on you. Icing when you're flying at night is sometimes hard to see. I have no ice protection on my airplane. I have a friend that has a SR-22, which has the TKS system, so that gives them at least a level of finite ice protection. We have the heated wings on the jet, so even then, we don't try to live in the icing conditions. We don't try to stay in it. We transverse it, if so to speak. Icing affects flight in so many different ways. And you know, it doesn't matter. It could be even frost on the wings, just a little bit. Somebody say, what? This is a big deal. Yes, it is. We had a G4 in Pierre, South Dakota that sat outside and developed frost on the wings. Didn't look like a whole lot. We had it de-iced. You want to make sure that wing is clean. So you're going to leave the ground with this airplane in good shape. Any kind of ice is not a good thing. Increased drag, decreased lift, reduced thrust, increased weight of the aircraft. All of those are big factors in your performance, and it can sneak up on you. You know, one of the techniques that's taught, if you think you're in icing conditions, even with ice protection, is occasionally turn off the autopilot to make sure everything's still in trim. One of the telltale signs that you are running into ice, you got the autopilot on, you notice that trim's just kind of running back because the angle of attack increases to keep you flying and the airspeed starts dwindling. So ice is very scary, and you need to plan for it and make sure that you're an aircraft that's either capable of handling it, you're capable of handling it, and also if you're not in an aircraft capable of handling it, you stay on the ground. Number of different kinds of icing. You have clear icing. As the name says, clear, smooth, and glossy. A lot of times you see the clear icing in cumulus clouds. It's the clear ice forming there on the leading edge. Rime icing is from the supercooled droplets of water. That's right, you can have droplets of water, liquid water, below freezing, but it will freeze on contact with the surface of the airplane. And then you have the mixed icing where you have, it's kind of the rough and smooth and just kind of like a conglomeration up there on the wing. The supercooled droplet idea, imagine your airplane The skin of it is very, very cold, below freezing. You have the supercooled droplet. Look, that's liquid water turning immediately into ice. Look how much it builds up out there. That can happen in a very, very short period of time. We're talking about 10, 15 minutes, sometimes quicker than that, depending on the circumstances. So it's not anything that you want to mess with. Very, very dangerous. Where are the supercooled large droplets found? You know, it's really cold way up high, but a lot of the worst icing is going to be found anywhere from almost at the ground to about 15,000 feet in the so-called warmer layers of the atmosphere. Minus 12 degrees Celsius and a little bit warmer than that. That's where your icing is going to be found. That's where you have the most moisture available, and that's where you have the air mass that is just perfect for the ice to develop. When you get up, you know, when we're at 35, 40,000 feet or higher, if we happen to be in the clouds, very seldom do we have any icing. The icing that we would have would be if we were in some towering cumulus cloud, which we shouldn't be in anyway. So look for cloud top heights about 12,000 feet with cloud top temperatures warmer than minus 12 degrees centigrade. That's where you are going to find most of the icing. It's usually found in the mid levels of clouds. A lot of folks think it's way up high. That's why we're always told, hey, if you're an icing, climb. A lot of times you're going to be above the temperature where the icing forms. Also, sometimes if you have any ice accumulation, if you descend, you may not be able to get back up, and then you've got terrain in your way. But again, I want to stress this. The big thing I want to stress, if you're in an airplane that is not equipped to handle ice, avoid this stuff like the plague. Lots of information out there in terms of icing forecast. You can find it handy on ForeFlight. You can look at the imagery section and go into the freezing level at different altitudes. There's forecast icing and the freezing level. Also look at the icing sigmets. Look at current aircraft icing reports. True story. Last year, just after Christmas, not newly minted, but fairly new VFR Pilot goes up into Virginia to do some business up there, and is trying to get back home and leaves at night. Remember, Virginia's got a lot of terrain around there. Ceilings are about 2,000 feet, 2,500 feet. It's cold. There's icing reports in the area. Airplane's a Cherokee 6. Pilot takes off and gets into the clouds. It's nighttime. Can't really see where the clouds are. And airplane ices up. Airplane crashes. And that's a fatal accident. No way in the world would I have even thought about doing that. I don't think that pilot necessarily thought he was doing anything dangerous. I just don't think he had the comprehensive knowledge to know this is a bad plan, and ended up getting into some pretty serious trouble there. And with the surrounding terrain, really backed himself into a corner. So very important to avoid the icing. There's maximum icing severity, 1,000 feet MSL, all the way up to flight level 300. And you can adjust this on the Aviation Weather Center site to whatever altitudes that are appropriate for your airplane and for your region of the country. You can also see the icing reports there with data link weather. You can look at the cloud tops, icing layers, all of that information right there in the cockpit for you. You can see that on your iPads if you got that integrated in. And of course, G1000, it's in that. It's in a lot of different avionics packages, which is very handy to folks. And a lot of this information I'm talking about here really pertains to the smaller general aviation airplanes, but ice is bad news for everything. Situational awareness is key. Do you check the weather days in advance? As I like to preach, and through this presentation, multiple sources of weather information, and continue to check that weather information. So how do you determine the icing layer? So what we're looking at right here is a skew T chart. The box here on the left-hand side has a red line, then you have a green line. The red's the temperature, and the green is the dew point. And this is the atmosphere from the surface all the way up to 100 millibars, way up there. over 50,000 feet. So that's way up there, higher than we would fly. You've got a 0-degree isotherm here. If you see the red line and the blue and the green line to the left of that 0-degree isotherm, that's where you're likely to have icing. And over here, you got the numbers in millibars, 1,000 millibars, 850s like 5,000 MSL, 700s like 9,000 MSL. So we would, in this particular example, I'm looking here, we would have icing probably from around 5,000 feet. And that icing is going to stick with us all the way through about 18,000 feet before we would break out. So that's what that is showing us. That is off a computer forecast model, but again, gives us an idea of where those icing levels are. And by the way, I've got a video that is on, I've got a YouTube channel. It's called Beyond the Briefing, and it breaks down how to actually look at some of this SKU-T data and make more sense of it. Right there, I circled where you have the icing layer. That's also where you have the clouds. Basically, it's where you have the clouds and the clouds below 0 degrees Celsius. Freezing rain versus sleet. Some folks say, well, can I get into ice if I'm VFR? You can, because it could be raining and your aircraft could be below freezing as far as the aircraft temperature of the fuselage and the wings, but the atmospheric layer that you're flying through is above freezing. So you have this cold rain that freezes on contact with the airplane. Same reason you get freezing rain at the surface. With a sleet sounding, this is over on the right-hand side, you've got freezing temperatures at the ground, and then you have a warm layer where you have these little pellets form. The freezing rain sounding is the temperature is above freezing right over your head, and then in the lowest levels of the atmosphere, 3,000 or 4,000 feet, 5,000 feet, the temperatures are below freezing, and that ends up sticking to the skin of the aircraft. Moving on to visibility. What causes low visibility? Low visibility is the result of the temperature and the dew point being equal. We learned that in our private pilot training. When you have the temperature and dew point together, that's 100% relative humidity. This will result in fog. The greater the temperature dew point spread, the better the visibility. That's why typically when we heat up during the day, we see the visibility increase. But early morning or late at night, when that temperature and dew point come together, that's when we actually see the visibility drop. Best recipe for radiation: fog, clear skies, calm winds, high humidity, and a very stable atmosphere. That's when you get the radiation fog. That's the fog that a lot of times we see set up across an airport. Advection fog or steam fog can affect airports as well if they are near a body of water. There's a look at some steam fog. If you've ever operated at an airport near a lake, sometimes that can be problematic. So visibility is a big deal. I know Part 91, you can take off if it's 0-0 out there. There are no legal limits to restrict your takeoff, but it's certainly not a good idea to take off when you can't see to get back, or if you have an engine issue or some other kind of malfunction. So that's my presentation. I want to save enough time here for anybody that had any questions.
If anybody's got any questions, if you want to mute yourself, you're more than welcome to ask questions along the way.
Hey, I'd like to ask a question. JP, thank you for your presentation. You have a fascinating story, and I'm a big meteorology nerd myself. I happen to live in a very dynamic region of the country. I live in Central Oregon, and weather is tough here. We get all sorts of those things you just showed: freezing rain and sleet, and all that. Also, we get a lot of these around the freezing rain times, as you might imagine, under a high pressure system with like no movement or mixing in the atmosphere, a lot of low layer advection fog. How can you look at which models to get an idea for how well the mixing will occur?
For something like that, you want to be as high resolution as you can. My model of choice with that would be, it depends on how much of a weather nerd you are. The high resolution rapid refresh model is a good tool for that, because to really get a handle on what's happening uh, in that kind of local area, you need to have something that has 3 kilometer resolution. So I would look in terms of the mixing of all of that, I would get on a site like Pivotal Weather, go to my area, my region, click on that part after I've selected the HRRR, click on that maybe near my airport or where my airport is, and it's going to give you a skew T chart, and you're able to look on that skew T chart to see just what's going on with the mixing of the atmosphere and what the winds are at every level. A lot of information is going to be available with that.
Cool. Any other questions?
Hey, JP, Michael, I'm glad you said high res rapid refresh, because that was one of my questions. Because when I
Awesome.
went on Pivotal Weather yesterday, it was like HRRR, and I'm like, what the heck does that mean? I didn't understand that, but no,
Yeah, it's
thank you.
alphabet soup there. You're going to run into, if you go to any of these model sites, you're going to see things like HRRR, NAM, that's a North American model, which has been around for a number of years, the
Yeah.
GFS, the ECWF, which is the European, a lot of different things there. My go-tos for anything that's in the near term and is going to be the highest resolution is going to be the HRRR and also the 3 kilometer NAM.
3 kilometer NAM.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Now you had mentioned that you look at the models in the United States and you look at the models in Europe. Maybe I'm confused. Why would you look at the European models?
No, you're looking at a model that's designed by the Europeans that's actually run in Europe, but it covers the United States.
It does. Okay.
Yeah,
All
yeah,
right.
and it covers, you can look at different regions of the US. In many regards, the European, in terms of a medium range forecast model, does perform well than its American counterpart, which is the GFS. So no, we're not actually looking at models that are over in England. We're actually looking at the data that is for the United States. It just happens to be created by the European Meteorological Organization.
Okay. So you're trying to basically compare what they're looking at, what we're looking at, and how the two agree or disagree.
Yeah, and typically I lean. This is for if like today is Monday. If I'm trying to figure out what's going to happen on Friday, I'm probably going to lean toward the euro. If I'm trying to figure out what's going to happen tomorrow, I'm going to go HRRR. That's just a different tool. You use a screwdriver for one thing, and you use a hammer for something else.
Right. Okay. Huh. If you were to maybe put in a short sentence or condense it as much as possible for the pilots, and what are the most important things to look for as far as a cold front, warm front, stationary front, occluded front?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I hear those terms all the time, but I really don't know what they're basically telling us as far as what we should be looking for
Sure.
if a cold front's coming.
Yeah, sure. Anytime you hear the term front is essentially a boundary between air masses. Typically, your more violent type weather is going to be associated with a cold front. Think of a cold front as a bulldozer moving across an area and lifting up the warmer and moist air, lifting it and replacing it with colder and more dense air. It looks like a big wedge moving across. Cold fronts are associated with the big squall lines. Sometimes you can have tornadoes along those squall lines. That is going to give you the most violent type weather in terms of flying. The warm fronts, not as much. They're going to give you lower visibility, rain, kind of a rainy, yucky day. Same thing with the occlusions and the stationary fronts. Basically, a stationary front is just a boundary where it's not getting anywhere. It's just sitting there. You're not seeing the warm air or the cold air being able to advance. So when you have a stationary front, which is the alternating red and blue on a map, means you're going to be stuck with showers, clouds, lower visibility, perhaps even some thunderstorms, and it may be taking place for days.
Okay. All right. And it wasn't until a couple of years ago that I learned that a low pressure system rotates to the left and a high pressure system rotates to the right.
Except in the
And
southern hemisphere, it's completely backwards in if you are south of the equator.
okay.
And that's all because of the Coriolis force, like
Right.
the deflection to the right in the northern hemisphere.
Okay. Okay. The other question I had, and you were showing it on the screen here, are microbursts always associated with a cloud layer?
Or micro, okay, yeah, you actually have to for for a definition of a microburst, you're gonna have to have a parent cloud. You're gonna have to have some kind of air mass that's collapsing. It could be dry, but there's gonna have to be, it's gonna have to come from somewhere. It's not gonna
Okay,
be
so
a clear day and you're gonna have a microburst. No.
it's okay. That's what I wanted. So if I'm coming in the Centennial, it's clear skies, no clouds around. My potential to hit a microburst are zero.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Good. This is great. All right. I don't
Well,
mean
at
to
least
haunt you.
it can't be. I want to make sure folks are completely clear. It can't. You could have something that's perhaps nearby that could be a collapsing storm that could give you a gust front or something like that that could impact your weather. But if it's clear and a million across, high pressure and control, it's just sunny across the state of Colorado. This thing's not going to come from out of the blue. Okay.
Right. I think sometimes when we're flying out here, we'll see a bunch of clouds, and then we'll see, I think it's called Virga. It'll
Yeah.
go from the clouds to the ground. And
Mm-hmm.
I learned the hard way up in Greeley one time with an instructor coming into Greeley. We tried to stay as far away from it as we could, but we got bounced around pretty good.
Oh yeah, very much so. Virga, and that's the precipitation that it's evaporating before it actually reaches the ground. Fall streaks, it's sometimes referred to as.
And you can definitely expect a pretty fair amount of downdraft if you're going to fly through Virga.
Absolutely.
There's actually some really good videos, time lapse, where when Virga is going along and the whole cell just basically unloads, and it becomes a pretty significant downdraft at that. Cool. Does anybody else have any questions?
I just one about the fog. I worked up in Lebanon, New Hampshire on the weekends for an FBO. It's up there. And I do remember weekend mornings when I was up there, we'd drive into work at 5 in the morning and there was fog everywhere, and it didn't lift till sometimes 4 in the afternoon.
Yeah. If you cannot increase that temperature dew point spread, or if you're in a situation in some of the coastal areas, if you have something that's continuing to evect in from somewhere, the visibility is not going to increase.
Yeah, less than a half a mile was the Connecticut River.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that had something to do with it.
Absolutely. It's like, what are they doing putting airports near rivers? I've come in a King Air before at 3 o'clock in the morning around a river near here. Oh my gosh. Everywhere else would be clear, and this dang airport would be like 200 overcast, and we break out right there at minimums.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I've got this really unique weather forecasting service that I use, and it's the days you can fly in IMC in Colorado. They're pretty much guaranteed the days that I have to work, and when freezing level is at 0. So those are the 2 days that are actual IMC days here in Colorado.
Yeah.
So if I'm working, it's probably going to be a good day for IMC. Cool. Well, if there's no other questions, we'll go ahead and wrap this up then. I don't know, Mike,
I
if you
tell you
want
what,
to go ahead.
I appreciate the invite, and I love, as you can tell, love talking about weather, and I'm always available if somebody ever has a weather question or whatever, and nothing's a silly question. I'm always happy to answer. And my other business partner, we have a weather consulting business. If it's super complicated, he has a PhD in meteorology, so I can defer to him.
Okay. No, I really appreciate you accepting our invitation, JP. That was good. You answered a lot of my questions. I took a lot of notes going around here.
I saw
But like,
somebody was asking about the website I was referring to, and I think they said, is he saying typical weather? It's pivotal, like a pivotal moment, pivotal with a P, pivotalweather.com.
yeah, yeah. Okay, good. And you do reference that in your article in the AOPA
Yeah.
magazine that you did
I've got
on June.
another article I'm working on right now, and it's going to be avoiding turbulence. And kind of the spirit of that one is my wife. She hates turbulence, so I have acquired a unique set of anti-turbulence skills to keep her happy.
That's good. All right, super. All right, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it. Stay tuned for our next month's presentation. And JP, you have a good vacation.
All right, you guys fly safe. We'll talk later.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.